Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. As some of you may know if you've been watching, I've been on a quest to try to find fantasy novels, especially modern fantasy novels, that I like. Being a huge Tolkien fan growing up, I've spent many years trying to get into fantasy, largely unsuccessfully. I think because my bar for fantasy was set so high with Tolkien, I really struggle finding other books in the genre that I like. I find a lot of them very flat, very empty. They're so focused on things like world building that they forget to make good, compelling characters. The dialogue is stilted. I don't know. There's just I really struggle with the fantasy genre, but I'm interested. There's a lot of fantasy tropes I like, and there's a lot of fantasy world building that I like. And so I really would like to love the genre. And so I've been trying to find stuff that I like, and I've really had a hard time. But I found a book that I really loved, and so I wanted to share it with you. It's a modern book. It was published in 2020, and it's so rare for me to find a book in the genre that I love that I'm excited to talk about it with you. Now, I discovered this book back in December when I was in the UK. I was in a bookshop in England, and I saw this book on the shelf, and I thought it looked interesting, but I didn't have room in my suitcase for it because I had already bought so many other books. So I thought, I'll make a mental note of that, and I'll buy it when I get back to the United States. And that's exactly what I did. And I finally picked it up, and I finally read it. And this is the book. It's called Mordew by Pheby. I think it's pronounced Pheby, but I could be pronouncing it wrong. He's a British author. I was attracted to the cover art for one thing. It stands out as this kind of black and white pencil drawing as opposed to all the colorful fantasy novels. I like that kind of thing. And I read the back cover, and I thought it sounded interesting, and I read it, and I thought it was excellent. The basic story, excuse me, takes place in this world. It's ostensibly our world in the future, I think, but it bears no resemblance to it, so it might as well just be a fantasy world. It takes place in the city of Mordew, which is surrounded by these slums full of poverty, and our main character, Nathan Treves, lives in one of these slums, and the slums are filled with this mud called the living mud, and the living mud possesses a magical property that it kind of spontaneously generates life, but it generates life without any kind of soul to it or without any purpose, and it's often disgusting or deformed or poisonous, and there's little things that are called flukes that show up in the mud and then are immediately dissolved back into it again or don't live very long. And the poor people in the slums gather the flukes and skin them for leather and try to use them in various ways to try to make money. It's a very bleak and dark society that Pheby paints here. There's a lot of suffering in it. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of desperate people. There's a lot of crime. And so it's not a very pleasant place, but it's full of all kinds of fantastical stuff. And there's a list at the beginning of the book, which I found very intriguing and amusing, of all the crazy fantastical elements that appear in the book, things that you would not expect to see in a normal society. And Nathan is the son of a dying man who is possessed by virtue of inheritance, a magical spark, the seed of magical ability, and his father has instructed him never to use it because it's too dangerous and it will ruin you and everything you care about. But Nathan is poor and a young boy. I think he's 12 years old, and he's tempted because the spark can help him live a more comfortable, live a less suffering life, and help the people he cares about. And so he's tempted to use it. The city of Mordew is abuts against the sea, and it's surrounded by a seawall, which is constantly being attacked by these firebirds. And the city features a glass road, which goes in a spiral up to the sky, where in a big palace, there's the master who runs over the entire city and is an accomplished wizard, basically, who has lots of powers, and everyone lives in fear and awe of him. And there's a man called the Fetch who comes down and he collects children whose parents are too poor to keep them, and he sells them to the Fetch, and he brings them to the master, and the master will sometimes, not always, he usually rejects them, but sometimes take them into his employ and send checks to the parents send money to the parents in order that they may sustain themselves. The master is a mysterious figure who we don't learn much about until later. So that's kind of the setup for the story, and the story revolves around Nathan exploring his magical power, and his parents eventually decide to sell him to the master because they need the money, and we find out more about that situation there. He also falls in with a group of a gang of criminals, basically, who go around trying to make their living, basically just stealing from people, and he hangs out with them for a little while. And there's a lot of morally gray characters in this book. Nobody's wholly good or wholly bad. Even the main character, Nathan, is fairly brutal. He will sometimes, use his power in fairly violent and destructive ways without giving it much thought. He's also not that smart of a character, which I find interesting, because usually in these books, the protagonist is like the young boy is pure and virtuous and clever and quick, and he outsmarts the rest of the people around him. Nathan is not that smart, and he keeps getting manipulated by the people around him throughout the book. Part of the story is figuring out like who his real friends are and who's manipulating him and who's using him and for what purpose. So he's kind of led around. It reminds me of people complain about Frodo in Lord of the Rings, is that he just, has no agency and he just is driven along by the sequence of events. That's a little bit the case with Nathan Treves. He doesn't really know what's going on for most of the book, and when he tries to act on his own, it's usually misguided because he's been given bad information or he's been being manipulated by other people. And I just really loved the creativity and the world building and the strangeness of the world that Alex Pheby has created. And I thought the characters were good. I thought they were complex. I thought you get a sense of kind of who they are right off the bat, which I like. I like when you get a sense of characters and you can tell, I know who this guy is and I like him or I don't like him. I think that's, a lot of characters that I've complained about before in fantasy, they just seem a little flat. It's like they speak with these and thous and their dialogue is stilted. And I talked about this with the Priory of the Orange Tree, where they seem kind of indistinguishable from each other. They don't have their own personalities. Their personalities are aloof and noble rather than, real world traits that you see in real people. I thought this book didn't have that problem. I found the characters compelling and good. And I found the strangeness of the world good. It reminded me a lot, and maybe this is why I picked it up in the first place. I was immediately put in mind of the Gormenghast book by Mervyn Peake, and I think the similarity of the covers, they're not that similar now that I look at them, but they struck me as similar at the time. It kind of drove me to this in the first place. And I really, really love Gormenghast. It's such an incredible book, and it's full of such strange world building and such strange characters. And it's very odd, which I like, and this one reminds me of that as well. I thought it was just beautiful, and I never really knew where it was headed, and I was hooked the whole time. Maintaining this channel, I try to review a book a week, which means I have to read a book a week, and occasionally that means that I feel like I kind of have to rush through them, and I'm maybe not enjoying them as much as I otherwise would because I have to get them done for the review. And sometimes I'm like, I have to read when I don't feel like reading because I have to finish in time and kind of force myself to get through them. That sometimes happens, and that can be a little bit of a pain. And this is the first book I can remember in a while that I have not wanted to put down. I've just wanted to keep reading it all the time because I thought it was so enjoyable. There's also a large amount, about 100 pages of back matter at the end of the book. There's a long glossary that gives you much more information about the world, and then there's kind of like some extracts from like a sacred text almost about the world in the back of the book, about 100 pages worth. I don't recommend reading that at the beginning because there's spoilers in there. You should read it at the end, but it's worth reading once you finish the book. So I just finished that recently. But yeah, I was really gripped by this, and I wanted to find out what happened. And I thought all the world building and interesting things that he comes up with, because there's magic and there's demons and there's magical toys and spell books, and there's the Glass Road, which is very fantastical, and the Living Mud, which is fantastical, the Firebirds. There's just like an endless amount. There's talking dogs. There's an endless amount of just strange and whimsical things. But although it's very whimsical, it's not cheerful. It's a very dark setting. One thing I was surprised about, I looked at the reviews of this book on Goodreads just before I made this video, and it's not that well reviewed. There's a lot of 2-star, 1-star, 3-star ratings, not that many 5-star ratings. A lot of people didn't really seem to like it, and that surprised me because I really loved it. But I guess it really shouldn't surprise me because I suppose I'm pretty out of step with the modern fantasy genre and what people like, because I've read several books that are extremely highly regarded and are praised and get nothing but 5-star reviews that I didn't care for at all. So the fact that I should really be drawn to and attracted to something that is not well reviewed and not like the stuff that is well reviewed, I guess that's sort of typical for me. So maybe if you're like me, you will be drawn to this kind of outsider book a little bit. The last thing to say about this really is that it is not complete. The story does not end at the end of the book. There's clearly more to it, and I know there's a second book in the series. They're called Cities of the Weft, I think the series is called, and then the second one is called Malarcoy. It's the name of the other city, the neighboring city across from Mordew. So I assume that the same story is continued in that book, although I don't know that for sure, and I will be reading that at some point because I like this one so much. But if you are like me, and if you struggle to find fantasy novels you like, and if you are a fan of Gormenghast, you might want to check out this. because I thought it was similar to Gormenghast, and I thought it was delightful and really enjoyable, and avoided all the problems that I had with other books in the genre. So that's what I thought of Mordew. I hope you'll check it out, and I hope that I will enjoy the second volume as much as I like the first volume. That's all I have to say about it. So let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with the people on Goodreads who didn't like it? I'd be interested to know your perspective if that's the case, because I don't see anything not to like about it, except for maybe the fact that the main character is not the most virtuous or intelligent character ever. But that's what I thought of it. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you thought, or if you're interested in reading it, or if you know Alex Pheby's works. I think he wrote another 2 books before this one. So this is possibly more of a breakthrough for him after the first couple novels. I'm not really sure. And then if you enjoyed the review, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, do all the stuff you're supposed to do as good YouTube viewers, and check back next week for another book review, because I try to keep them coming at you every single week. Thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you next time.